Time for our weekly segment with Data Dr. Ken Colburn. Today's topic, tips for protecting your PC during tax season. So Ken, what should we think about before we start putting all that personal information like tax documents into our computer?
Well, we have the IRS that's really ready for this, and all the hackers are kind of licking their chops this time of year because they know from stealing identities, this is the time of year. The primary thing that we're concerned about is any hidden programs on your computer that you didn't know about that would allow somebody to either access your computer or is actually tracking every keystroke you make every day without your knowledge.
So what are some of the most common concerns about doing your taxes on your home computer?
Well, first and foremost, if your computer's acting funny, if it takes a long time to start up, if it's, giving you errors, those kinds of things, regardless of the identity theft issue, it's telling you it needs some help. It needs to be attended to. The problem with this is some of the things that can cause your computer to be really slow are these malicious programs that are running in the background, holding back some of the power of your computer, which is what's causing it to be so slow. So those are some good indicators that tell you, maybe before I start putting all this really important information on my computer, I should have somebody look at it, make sure I'm not infiltrated with some of these programs. And we've got some real simple like self-diagnosis tips that we have posted up there for folks that are, especially in the Windows arena, which is where most of the threats are.
So you bring up a good point. Is doing your taxes through an online service maybe safer than doing it on your home computer?
Well, yes and no, and it really depends on what you might be infected with. If you're using your home computer, but the information's actually being stored, like Intuit has their online TurboTax and TaxCut. There's all these different programs now where you're actually storing the information on their secured server. So from the standpoint of where the information is stored, it actually is safer because it's not physically on your computer at home. So that if in the future when you disconnect, somebody steals your computer, your tax records aren't on there. So from that standpoint, it's definitely safer. From the standpoint of somebody infiltrating your machine and gaining access to what you're typing, all they have to know is your username and password, and they can just go onto your online account and get it. So it's the same threat from that standpoint. So it's pros and cons. Really depends on what you're trying to protect yourself against.
All right, so give us the prescription of how to avoid all this stuff.
Well, and let's start with the most common. Here's the scenario that if you fit this scenario, you should be the most concerned, and that is if you have a high-speed internet connection and you've got teenagers in your house, you're in the highest risk group. So really pay attention to these tips here. Start by checking the number of running processes. In Windows, you just do the three-fingered salute known as Control-Alt-Delete, and up will come a little window in the bottom left-hand corner of the window to tell you how many processes are running. So you want to start your machine from scratch, do this quick test, and if it's over 35 to 40 for a desktop and 40 to 45 for a laptop, especially if it's in the 60, 70, 80 process range and you just started the machine, you have cause for concern. Have somebody look at it to make sure you understand what those extra processes are, because any number of them could be these malicious programs running in the background. Make sure and do what's called a deep scan with your antivirus and anti-spyware program, and that is, it's going to go through and check every single file on your computer. It's going to take a lot longer than it normally does because it's literally going to turn over every rock in your computer, make sure nothing's hiding in there, and obviously make sure everything's updated when you're doing that. And then here's the big threat I think most people forget about. When you do your taxes online or on your computer, one of the things that it does is it prepares it so you can print it. It creates what's called a PDF file with your complete tax return. Mm-hmm. And we're seeing more and more stories about this. We started talking about this 6-7 years ago. If your children are engaging in the P2P networks like LimeWire and Kazaa, you could unknowingly be sharing those tax records, not just this year's, last year's, everything on your computer with hundreds of millions of other people.
That's frightening.
Yeah, it is. And again, it's because the parents don't understand the exposure that their children are creating. And really, as a parent, you got to think about, do I even want this type of activity? We've talked about this on many, many segments. It seems harmless, but it's a major exposure issue. I went on last week just to see, is this still happening? And within 5 minutes, I found tax returns for 5 or 10 people in states all around the country.
Wow.
Everything I needed if I wanted to steal their identity was sitting right there.
Wow. Of course, you can also just not do your taxes on your computer and take them to an accountant, which is a whole lot easier.
Yeah, well, of course, that's always that alternative, which then takes and pushes the responsibility on them when it comes to this information.
Good point.
But there's tens of millions of people out there doing it on their computer. It makes perfect sense for a lot of people.
And then also kicking your kids off the computer, that also minimizes the risk.
I'll tell you what, if you've got what we call screenagers, you might seriously consider doing all of your banking and taxes and everything on a machine that they're not allowed to touch. That gives you that air wall, if you will, where they
Yeah.
can't mess up the computer.